What's up YouTube, Capital G here, looking at some new Weathery spells and traps coming out of Spirit Warriors. And guys, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we might have to curb our enthusiasm just a little bit on Weatherys in the sense of how good they're actually going to be, just strictly from a competitive standpoint. I don't mean whether people are going to end up liking the archetype, because there are clearly tons and tons of archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh that aren't super competitive, but you still love them, like, you know, me with Dark Magician and Lunar Lights and stuff like that. And going into this, we only knew a teeny bit about Weathery as an archetype anyways. We knew that we kind of like the boss monster, not just the artwork, but the Infernity Barrier like effect, the Solemn Warning like effect, the fact that it could kind of summon itself when it was banished by a Weathery effect. So the boss monster looked pretty damn good, but these spell and trap cards seem a little underpowered, and also they're column based, which I was just like, wait, what? I'm not understanding why Konami has made both of these cards column based, and if yeah, every single spell and trap in this archetype is going to be column based, it might be a little more difficult. But I'll go ahead and read the cards, and then you guys can come to your own kind of thoughts and conclusions, etc., etc. So let's look at the first card, and once again, I have to say the artwork is fantastic. It seems to be like a kind of a dark rainy storm, and you got this adorable little frog here. This is Rain Weathery Pattern. It is a continuous spell card. You can only control one face-up Rain Weathery Pattern, and that is built into both the spell and the trap. So if you can only control one copy of all of these spells and traps, and they're all going to be column-based, that might be a problem in itself, because yeah, it really makes you, you know, have to make sure that you summon your monsters in the right zones. It says a Weathery effect monster or monsters in the main monster zone in the same column as this card, as well as the main monster zones adjacent to that zone, gains this effect. And if you don't know what adjacent means, it basically means next to. So if this is in the middle spell and trap zone, obviously the Weathery monster above that would get this effect, and the monsters to the left and to the right of that zone would obviously get the effect as well. That effect is, it's a quick effect. It says you can banish this card, target one spell and trap card your opponent controls, return it to the hand. That is, there was so much potential for that to be a really good effect, and it just, in my opinion, honestly isn't. You guys have looked at other monsters that have effects similar to this. I can't remember exactly what the card is, but there's an aroma monster that has almost identical to this. It's like every time your opponent, or every time you gain life points, you get to bounce a spell and trap your opponent controls. Just that in itself isn't very powerful. And you look how underwhelming that card was. Bouncing spells and traps aren't really, like, it's not really good unless it's something like Trevier, where, you know, you're bouncing all your opponent's spells and traps at once. And, you know, yes, I do understand that essentially you could have 3 different monsters on your field that could bounce spells and traps, but when you really think about it, unless it's some weird hard once per turn like ABC, or excuse me, like Union Hanger or Fire Formation Tenki, it's not gonna honestly make that big of a difference, because if you bounce something like a Cosmo Town, or if your opponent activates something like a Diagram, it doesn't matter if you bounce it, they're just going to reactivate it anyways. And, you know, at first I tried to think, okay, well, what if I bounce a continuous trap card, like a Fiendish Chain, or maybe like a Call of the Haunted? But let's just look around the meta, guys. No one plays continuous trap cards. Like, the only deck I can think of that actually is relevant that plays a bunch of continuous trap cards is like True Dracos, maybe, or, you know, some of the True King hybrid decks, because they obviously can play the True King, True Draco traps cards. But other than that, like, if a True Draco player plays one of their spell cards and you bounce it, who cares? They're just going to activate it again, so it's not really doing that much. Now, I think that Konami intentionally made this so that it wouldn't blow up spells and traps, because I think that they thought that that would have been too easy. And honestly, if you had three walking MSTs on the field, that might have been a little too OP, because your opponent would basically never be able to activate spells and traps that turn. But I think that what it should have done is it should have banished them until the end phase, because then you could actually get rid of their like field spells for the whole turn. Like, they activate Diagram, you banish it, and then it doesn't come back to the end phase, and it's like, wow, you know, at least you took away Diagram for an entire turn, something like that. And obviously they don't get their search, but I don't know. This card seems incredibly underwhelming, probably like a 1-of in a deck. I just can't think of any time in Yu-Gi-Oh where bouncing your opponent's spells and traps just one at a time has really been all that great. Even if you could bounce your own spells and traps, there would be, you know, some playability there for like Call of the Haunted, but I don't think that card's very strong. This card, I think, is actually decent. This is the Weathery Trap. This is Thunder Weathery Pattern. Oh, okay, I get it. So it looks like all the spells and traps are are going to be named after types of weather. We had rainy, now we have thunder, so maybe there'll be like a blizzardy weathery pattern or something like that, maybe a hail weathery pattern, tornado weathery pattern, etc., etc. This is a continuous trap. It is just like the other one in the fact that you can only control one face-up copy of itself, and the second effect pretty much applies the same exact way. A weathery monster in the main monster zone that is above this card gains the effect, and monsters that are adjacent to it. So, you know, basically monsters that are exactly next to it. That effect is at the start of the damage step. If this card battles an opponent's monster, you can banish this card, return the opponent's monster to the hand. I actually think that this effect it's decent. I'm not gonna say it like it's super fantastic, because in certain situations I think that it can be. Essentially, it turns your monsters into Neo-Spacian Grand Mole, which is still a pretty fine card in 2017, but if I told you to build a deck, I mean, Neo-Spacian Grand Mole wouldn't be something that you would think about putting into your deck, but having all of your monsters, or at least a good portion of your monsters, be walking Neo-Spacian Grand Moles is not bad. I mean, it's really good against extra deck monsters. It's really good if Rituals ever become the meta again, because it kind of wrecks Rituals hard, but overall, I don't think that it's like, it's not underwhelming, but it's not like overpowered or anything like that. It's just a completely balanced card. Maybe something you'll want to run a couple of copies of. I mean, at this point in Yu-Gi-Oh, with there being so many mirror forces, one could argue which is, you know, what type of effect would you rather have? Would you rather just have like a quaking and put all your opponent's monsters face down, or would you rather bounce them to the hand? Obviously, against things like pendulums and a lot of effect monsters, bouncing to the hand doesn't really do all that much, but then against extra deck monsters, it's pretty good. So far, I don't know, the spells and traps don't really seem that powerful to me. They seem very underpowered. The fact that they're column based doesn't make sense at all to me. I just don't understand why it's not all face up, you know, weathery monsters gain this effect, because I don't know, it seems like column cards should just, there shouldn't be like an archetype that's completely column focused. If so, you know, why? Like, why are weatheries column focused? I just don't really get it. So hopefully the monsters in the archetype, like the main effect monsters that go in the deck, will save this archetype, and hopefully they all have like really powerful effects when they're banished, because we were kind of wondering how they were going to banish themselves, but it looks like all the spells and traps have banish effects built into them. So far I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but I'm definitely adjusting my expectations of Weathery, and now I'm starting to put them in more of the casualish, the casual type, you know, decks, maybe a Red Eyes type deck, or something that's more focused on just being fun, not necessarily like a top tier True Draco or something like that. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. As always, let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think that these cards are fine? Do you guys think that they're underpowered? Let me know in the comment section, and subscribe if you have not already. And actually, one last thing about Weathery and these spells and traps being column-based, which I'm not really a fan of. And the thing about column-based cards is I think that the power needs to be inherently stronger on these cards because of the limitations of column-based cards and just the innate design of them. The fact that if I've got my monster all the way on the right side of the field, but I have one of my Weathery spells and traps all the way on the left side of the field, like, there is no synergy between them. That means that that Weathery monster doesn't get the effect just based on nothing more than the card's actual placement. So you look at a card like Shutline, and that's a perfect example of power to, I guess, kind of how situational the card is. A lot of people have looked at Shutline and they've said that, you know, the card can be broken and useless at the same time because it has that broken Infernity Barrier effect of being able to negate anything, you know, without any life point cost. But at the same time, you know, if your opponent doesn't activate something in that exact column, the card is completely useless. So I'm looking at these Weathery spells and traps, and if Konami is going to make the rest of this archetype completely column based as far as the spells and traps go, then they need to ramp up the fucking power of these spells and traps. Like, they basically need to be broken level to make this thing competitive. Otherwise, we're just gonna have another, you know, completely casual deck that, if maybe Konami didn't make them column based, could have been playable, or if they would have ramped up the power of the effects, could have been playable. But you can't have both. You can't have them be column based and weak. That's how you end up with all of those shitty cards from Cyber Dark Impact that obviously nobody ever played.